Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this video lesson about the age of exploration. This is part 1 of 2, so there will be 2 different video lessons on the age of exploration. My name is Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. So without further ado, here we go. All right, so these are the key topics that we're going to be talking about during this video lesson. So we're going to look at Native American culture before Europe took their stuff. We're going to look at the New World, the West African connection. This deals with triangular trade. And yes, this matters. Doesn't matter as much now. It will matter more when we talk about colonization in a later lesson. Europe, right before they trashed the place. The European concept of the New World. The French, not all that important right now, but we're going to talk about them just a tad. And the English, they were very, very important for United States history. Roanoke, the colony that thought it could but couldn't. And we're going to go into specific details about Native American tribes. We won't talk about all these things in this video lesson. All of these key ideas will be split between the two. All right. Native American culture before Europe took their stuff. It's important to remember that the economies the Native Americans had were agrarian. Agrarian comes from the word farming, or it means to farm. So these economies were based off farming, hunter-gathering, basic stuff. They operated on a barter system. There was no real currency, like, we exchange dollar bills. You go, you want to buy a candy bar at CVS, you go and you give them dollars, right? That didn't happen there. It was just, oh, I need some milk and you have some cheese. Let's switch and we'll both have what we need. The Aztec were very, 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 very important. They dominated Mexico and most of Central America. The reason why they're so important for United States history is because they had taken over everyone else before the Europeans got there. So by the time Europe got there, all they had to do was take over the Aztec instead of taking over, 20 or 30 different tribes. So it made conquest much easier and much faster for the Europeans, and they were able to get into what is now the United States of America much, much faster. Their languages varied, their dialects varied. Now let me kind of put a disclaimer in here. I cannot possibly adequately discuss all of the different Native American tribes or Indian tribes that existed in the New World. There was rich and varied cultures in the New World, and for me to try to break all that down in a survey video lesson would not do that justice. You can take whole college courses on particular Native American tribes. You can also research on your own. So in an effort to save time, I'm simply going to say that languages varied and dialects varied, and then cultures and identities varied. Many Native cultures, not all, had this thing called gender reciprocity. And this idea of gender reciprocity meant that men and women were equally important in Native cultures. Not necessarily that they did the same things or that they were equal. This is important. They were not equal, but they were equally important. And this matters because Europeans existed in a system called patriarchy, where men dominated everything. Patriarchy means male-dominated society. All right? And so women really didn't matter that much. Europeans really didn't value women. They were there for a purpose, but men were more important. Men were superior. So when they saw Native American women having importance in their society, in the Native society, this rubbed the Europeans the wrong way. They were not happy about this. They were like, whoa, this is no good. So they felt very threatened by that. And this was part of that cultural conflict that was occurring during this time. So what did the natives want? They wanted peaceful trade. What did they get? They got smallpox, all right? So Europeans didn't realize this, but this was one of the first instances of biological warfare on a large scale. Most natives were actually killed by disease, not by conquest or by fighting. Although, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of that going around. We are talking about the conquistadors after all. But this issue of disease was significant. The disease killed way more natives than anything else the Europeans could do. All right. And as this was happening, the European settlers took their land and eradicated as many native cultures as possible because they wanted to make room for European colonies. All right. Now, something that's very, very important, this key idea that I want you to pay attention to right here, the Columbian Exchange. Okay, the Columbian Exchange was a biological and cultural exchange between the Old and New Worlds, okay? Europe got way more out of the Columbian Exchange than the natives did, but we'll talk about that on the next slide. So here's one example. I have 3 slides of visuals to represent the Columbian Exchange. So those of you who are visual learners or are trying to look for a way to help you remember things, this is one method. And then on the next 2 slides, I have similar information, but different formats of the presentation of information. So as you can see here, this is all the stuff that came from the New World to Europe. Okay, so Americas to Europe, Africa, and Asia, right? So corn, tomatoes, potatoes, pumpkin squash, ooh, chocolate. Yes, that's good times right there. But Europe also sent stuff over to the New World. So this is to the Americas from Europe, Africa, and Asia. And we sent over coffee. How nice of us. How wasn't that so nice? Coffee, chocolate, it's a beautiful combination. But I want to draw your attention right here to all the diseases. That's a lot of diseases, okay? And this is right here what wiped out the Native American tribes. Here's another breakdown. You can see Africa's right here, Old World is right here, and then the New World is here. So you can see this exchange here. It's broken down a little bit of a different way, but similar information. And here's yet another breakdown, okay, of who got what. So just, take a look at those things. You can pause the video, rewind, take a look, and see which format makes more sense to you. All right. The West African connection. This is triangular trade, folks. Now, as I said on the first slide, a triangular trade is going to become much, much more important when we talk about our unit on colonization, okay? But this is the foundation of that concept, so this is really important. Triangular trade describes the exchange of slaves and alcohol and resources and raw materials that occurred between Africa, Europe, and the Americas. Okay, that's the triangle: Africa, Europe, the Americas. Okay, so we're going to talk about that cycle of who gets what. And as I said, we're going to get into more detail about that in colonization. Bottom line, thousands of slaves were brought over to work on the plantations, mostly because the natives died. The Europeans wanted to use the built-in labor force, but they couldn't survive and couldn't handle the working conditions, so they ended up having to import their labor force. Now, this is an interesting idea. Between 1650 and 1831, more slaves than Europeans came to the New World. That's crazy. You just contemplate that for a minute. More slaves than Europeans came to the New World. Now, Europeans brought the slaves, okay? They bought the slaves, but Africans sold their own people into slavery. They were usually captives of rival tribes, but this is something that the history books tend to leave out. I'm not totally sure why, but it's important to know that nothing in history happens in a vacuum, okay? Everything that happens in history is connected to something else, okay? So the idea that Europeans bought slaves, yes, that's important, but they wouldn't have had any slaves to buy if Africans weren't selling their own people. Okay, so the African continent was intimately involved in the slave trade. It's important to remember that. Europe, right before they trashed the place. So there's this thing called the Renaissance. All right, it took place between about 1350 and 1550. Now, if you Google the Renaissance, you're going to see other date ranges, and those date ranges are correct also. You will find in history that we kind of arbitrarily try to, we'll say this started here and ended here because, we just don't know what else to do. So there's a rough date range. You're looking at the 1300s to the 1500s. About everyone pretty much agrees at about 1600 the Renaissance was over for the most part. But this period was a period of rebirth of the Greco-Roman classics. What does that mean? Well, it means that ancient Greece and ancient Rome were doing some really cool stuff. And then when Rome fell, the Middle Ages, we call it the Dark Ages, like nobody was thinking about all that deep learning and stuff. Like it kind of got lost. We don't know where it went. We weren't looking at that. We weren't focusing on that. And right around the time that the Renaissance started, people started rediscovering Plato and Aristotle and all these really cool ideas from the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. Ancient Greek was coming back as a language. So it was this period of cultural and artistic and intellectual and political rebirth. And this idea called humanism, the idea that people could achieve things, that we could make good things happen. Now, this sounds like, well, yeah, of course we can make good things happen. But you have to think about the Middle Ages where humanity was like on the low end of the totem pole, like everything was all about God. So unless God decided to make good things happen, then no good things were going to happen. So the Renaissance was very different because it changed from being pro-church to pro-people, right? It started becoming a little bit more anti-church and more pro-human beings being able to take control of their own destinies without the church. That's very important because the church was not about exploration, man. They were not about that. So if the Renaissance hadn't happened, we wouldn't have been exploring because the church would have said, no, no, no. But the Renaissance said, yes, yes, yes. So this is how we started exploration. The printing press, kind of a big deal. That BFD stands for big freaking deal. It's a very big deal. This allowed knowledge to be spread throughout all of Europe because before you just had monks who were like on their own by themselves, like trying to copy all this stuff down. And now with the printing press, you could make copies of multiple sheets of paper very, very quickly. This made books cheaper, easier, much more easily accessible. Now, this is a very important concept, the centralization of political authority, all right? The development of the modern nation state. The modern nation state is effectively central political authority. The idea that the church isn't controlling everything, that it's a king, all right? A king that has united their country under them, and so you have nobles in the church that used to control the place, but now strong kings called new monarchs took over control. That's the modern nation state, okay? Without the modern nation state, we couldn't pull together resources to enable us to actually explore in the first place. Okay, first of all, Spain and England, not friends. They're not friends, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. The European concept of the New World. 16th century was known as the Spanish century, all right? Spain was on top. Best army, best navy, best everything. They were on top of the world at that point. Conquistadors. You need to know about these guys because these guys were the folks who first went over and settled. So their official motto was God, glory, and gold. But their real motto was actually gold, gold, glory, maybe a little bit of God to keep up appearances. These guys were greedy folks. The encomienda system was actually developed to control the conquistadors because the conquistadors were really greedy. They were getting out of hand. So Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. All right, listen, we're going to initiate this encomienda system and we're going to give you land and titles in both Spain and the New World if you do what we want. So most of the conquistadors were like, all right, that sounds cool. We'll do it. The Treaty of Tordesillas was important because Spain and Portugal were the major rivals at that point. They were the major world powers. So the Treaty of Tordesillas kept both those countries out of war. It split the New World in half vertically. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, Brazil speaks Portuguese today and not Spanish. Here's a map of Europe just to give you a sense of, here's Spain right here, right? And then as you see the line here, this is Portugal. All right, just to give you kind of a visual of how Europe was set up. All right. Hernan Cortez. He was the conquistador poster boy. He's not a nice guy. Spanish, Catholic, greedy, and ambitious. He's the one who took out the Aztec leader. Like I said, they've pretty much taken out everyone else. All right, then when you think conquistador, you think Cortez. Now, here's where we get into England and Spain not being friends. All right, Catholic versus Protestant. England was Protestant, Spain was Catholic. What does this mean? It means they mixed like oil and water, which is to say they did not mix at all. This is going to become much, much more important as we move into colonization because there are going to be what we call colonial wars between the major powers. All right, the French. This is why people in Canada speak French. French got Canada in the colonial wars. French government was really lousy to the colonies. They did not do a good job there. And because they controlled it so much, economic growth wasn't happening, so people were very unhappy. This is going to cause problems for the French later, but not our problem because this isn't European history. The Protestant Reformation. This is a very, very big deal. All right. The Protestant Reformation was when Christianity split into two different branches. All right. Originally, you just had Christianity, and that was Roman Catholic. Everybody was Roman Catholic. Everyone. And then Martin Luther, who was this Augustinian monk, comes around, and he's like, dude, I don't really like what the Pope is doing. I'm not down with that, so I'm going to break off and form my own religion. So in he didn't originally set out to do that, but that's what happened. In 1517, he wrote this really long paper. It was called the 95 Theses, where he basically details how wrong is the church. Let me count the ways. There are 95 of them. And he lays out why the church was wrong. And that date represents the break between Protestant and Catholic. All right. Calvinism is a type of Protestant, and it will play a huge role in the development of the colonies. We'll talk about that in Unit 2. Elizabeth I, she was awesome. Her sister was crazy, but she was great. She unified England under one Protestant banner and made colonization possible. We'll talk more about her later on. All right, Roanoke, the colony that thought it could but couldn't. There were actually two. All right, first one was in 1584. Colonists never got what they needed, so they peaced out and went back to England. In the second one, they actually made it there, hung out for a while, but England was in a war with Spain, so no ships went to Roanoke, and then when they got there, nobody was there. Nobody knows where they went. All right, these are our key terms to remember. The Aztecs, Columbian Exchange, I don't need to read it. You can read. So go back through the video lesson, make sure you've got notes on all those key things. And that's it for now. I will see you next time in part 2.